Hi, Jake. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on, brother.
I don't know if you know this actually, but you're the first black belt that I ever met in my whole career back when I was a white belt training in my hometown.
No way.
So you were basically a Jedi Knight to me when I first met you. I was very young in the sport. I didn't really know that you could live from the sport and do jiu-jitsu every day and that it could be more than a hobby. So I was wondering how you got the idea that it could be more than a hobby.
Kind of like when I was like maybe like 14, I had this dream I was gonna try to do jujitsu, and I was interested in MMA and stuff like that too. But I'm from like a super small place, kind of similar to your story. I had access, I guess, at the start to really good people because there was a black belt there for a while, for maybe like 2 years. And I told people I wanted to do jiu-jitsu for a living. When I told people that, everybody thought it was, crazy. And there wasn't a lot of opportunities at the time, but honestly, I think I had a lot of stuff kind of like just fall into place. Like, I was able to start doing tournaments, which was kind of a good idea on my part, which I was able to make some money. The exchange rate in Brazil was good at the time, so I could go to Brazil for a longer period of time, and that money would last me a little bit longer. But I was doing like the 6 months in Canada and 6 months in Brazil, which was good, but it wasn't ideal because I would have like 6 months off competition. And then I got an opportunity with Cyborg where I lived in the gym. And that was something that was really good. And I had a couple opportunities fall in my lap there too, where, just a couple like little work opportunities. We'd work at tournaments sometimes on the weekends. But I kind of just played it by ear and things kind of just started to happen.
So you kind of knew early on that you actually wanted to live from jiu-jitsu. How far into your career were you when you were thinking, "Oh, maybe I can actually do this?"
I'd probably say like that idea started popping in my head when I was like 14. I just didn't really have any idea how to do it. I just figured, oh, if something happens, if there's an opportunity that happens, I'll jump at it. And I did have a lot of things fall into my lap, just kind of by coincidence. And I didn't think twice about taking the opportunity when they did come along.
What did your family think of you telling them that you wanted to be a jiu-jitsu pro? They probably didn't even really know much about it, did they, at the time?
Oh, they thought I was kind of crazy. I think after a while, when I started to have a little bit of success in Brazil and then went to the States and I won a couple big tournaments there, and they saw that things were kind of starting to fall into place, I think that they started to see that it was more realistic. They were definitely the first people that believed in me too. And my parents didn't really know what to do. I was terrible at school. I hated school right from the get-go. I was always bad at school, so there was no like plan B because I couldn't get into university. So I think they thought it was a little bit crazy at the start, but when things started to happen, I think they were definitely the first people that kind of believed that it was a possibility.
That nearly seems like a benefit that you weren't expected to go to college and have a really high, like academic style career, you know?
Yeah, they didn't have any hope for me for college at all, Tom. Zero.
It worked out well. So, because I know in my own, I was always kind of naturally good at school since I was a young age. So it was a bit of a surprise when I started kind of dropping out of college and saying that I wanted to focus on jiu-jitsu. My parents understood, but let's say my further family thought I was absolutely off the rails. Like, but then again, when I started winning some other big things, they kind of started to come around. What was the first tournament you won that made it feel worth it?
I would actually. I think the first time that I thought that like maybe the goal was doable because in the room I would do good against good guys at my belt level and stuff like that. I had beat a couple of good guys in like local tournaments in Rio and stuff like that, but I had never beat any like one that was like a world beater. But the first tournament that I realized that hey, maybe this is possible for me to do this at a high level. I fought like the state championship in Rio, which used to be a huge tournament. Now there's so many federations that are so split up. It's not as big, but you used to get like 3,000 competitors for this tournament. I ended up losing the first round, and I trained so hard, and I was doing really good in the smaller competitions. I was like, man, I just completely like shit the bed on this one. I ended up losing on stalling penalties. I got up and I got really nervous. I was just holding the guy, and I deserve the stalling penalties. So the coach that I was with, he signed me up for the absolute. And he's like, "You're gonna do the absolute." And I was like, "No, man, I just want to go home. I don't want to do the absolute." And I ended up doing I ended up doing a lot of matches. I ended up doing like I think I did 5 matches. I had to buy through the first round, and I fought just guys that were way bigger than me. I didn't fight anybody that was close to my weight. And I remember I got in the semifinals and I beat a guy named Sergio Teixeira. Tyson was his nickname, and he was a two-time world champ. I think he was a blue belt and purple belt world champ at super heavyweight. He beat Rodolfo Vieira. He beat Bernardo Faria. He beat a lot of the top guys at that time. I ended up beating him. I remember I was so scared to fight him because he was just like, I thought, man, there's no way I can beat this guy. He's bigger than me. He's stronger than me. He's better than me. I ended up having a really good match with him. I ended up beating him like 4-2. And I ended up losing in the finals of the absolute, actually. So I ended up losing, I think, by an advantage in the finals of the absolute. But after the tournament, I was like, man, shit, I beat some really good guys today. And like, I beat a guy that I thought that I'd never be able to beat, you know?
You were someone that traveled a lot, like when you were just coming up through the belts. How did those kind of opportunities to travel come about? Because there wasn't that many people at the time who were traveling to Brazil or traveling to other places like that.
So like I was talking to my mom about this the other day, like I had a lot of things kind of like fall into place. Like I'm from a tiny little town in Nova Scotia. The place where I'm from is like 10,000 people, the population. And my dad came home one day and he was like, "Hey, I met this guy, this Brazilian kid, and he lives right down the street, you know." And he said that he does jujitsu. And so he came up to the house and we became really good friends. The year that he stayed in Canada, he was doing an exchange program there. He wasn't really like really interested in training. He was more interested in partying and meeting the Canadian girls. You know, he was like, man, you're not going to drag me to a gym every day. But we became really good friends in school. Lucas was his name. And his mom invited, she's like, well, you know, I know Jake's a really good friend of yours. If he wants to come to Brazil for a couple of months during the summertime, he can do that. He can stay with us. So it was really easy for me the first 2 or 3 times I went because I had a big support system. You know, like I had a place I could stay at. I didn't have to pay any of the bills. There was a really good gym right down the road. I would walk to the gym a couple times a day to train. And then in 2006, I decided I was going to go to Rio because where I was staying in Brazil, there wasn't a ton of tournaments. I was in Espírito Santo, which is like in the southeast. And I ended up going to Rio for 8 months the first time. And there I was a lot more like on my own. But I realized after the 8 months that I could do it. So I was like, man, I'm going to take this trip every year. I'm going to come home, organize a tournament or try to organize a couple of seminars because I was a purple belt at the time. But where I'm from, there was a purple belt was like super rare. And I just would raise up a little bit of money and then I would go to Brazil for 6 months. And then soon afterwards, I got the opportunity with Cyborg. So I would do 6 months in Miami, 6 months in Rio.
Learning the Portuguese obviously is kind of a necessity when you go to Brazil, especially Rio, I'd say. Did it take you long to kind of settle in and feel like a bit less of a gringo, I suppose?
Oh, yeah, it took me a long time. People ask me all the time now. They're like, oh, man, you learned Portuguese so quick, blah, blah, blah. I don't like the people that knew me then that knew how long it took me. It took me forever to learn Portuguese. You know, I think my learning curve was a lot harder than a lot of people, you know, but I lived down there so long that I think I picked it up eventually, you know.
I have a friend that learned Portuguese when he was in Rio as well, but he learned it kind of the classic favela style Portuguese, and he didn't really know that it was that kind of style that he was learning. So he was using loads of slang words, loads of bad words. He would be talking to nice old Brazilian women, and he would be saying the most rude stuff on the planet, and kind of being unaware of it.
You got to watch out. There's 2 schools of thought there, and that's the thing. Like in the gym, most of the guys you're training with are using that language all the time. I've been in the same situation where I've used words that probably weren't the most appropriate or for the best for the situation as well, you know?
The connection with Cyborg then, how did that come about? Because it seems like another random occurrence.
One of the guys that I actually lived with my first trip in Brazil, it was kind of crazy. Pedro, he's a really good friend of mine. And he grew up like training with Cyborg. Pedro Paulinho is his name. Really good competitor, never really took jiu-jitsu serious at all, like trained like once or twice a week. I trained at BTT for like 6 months when I was there. And at the time, BTT was like a super strong school. I think they had won the teams championship for the Brazilian nationals, not for the Brazilian teams, but for the actual thing. They won the overall teams. They were like a super strong team. I could go pretty good with all the purple belts there. I felt like I was one of the better purple belts at the gym, and they had like a huge squad of guys. And Pedro was a purple belt there at the time, and this guy would smash me into the ground. Like I would do good with everybody, and he would tap me 4 times in a round. But he was super cool. We became friends. I ended up living with him actually at one point. He didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Portuguese. So it was kind of crazy, the living situation. But he grew up training with Cyborg. So I met Cyborg in Rio for the Brasileiro. And he spoke really good English already because he'd done an exchange program in the States. We kind of hit it off. And he told me, he's like, hey, why don't you come do the state championship in Mato Grosso do Sul, where he's from? And we ended up taking a bus from Rio to there. It took us like 30 hours to get there by bus. And we had to train in fight sports a little bit. And I became closer friends with Cyborg. And then the next year, the Worlds were in California. And I ended up staying with Cyborg. He was like, hey, we got an extra spot if you want to stay. Because I didn't know who I was going to stay with, you know. I ended up hanging out with him for like the 2 weeks. We trained a bunch. After that, he got the opportunity in Miami. So I actually lived in the very first fight sports in Miami that was on Arthur Godfrey in Miami. So I lived in the gym there for a while. And I lived in 3 of the different fight sports there. I lived in that one. I lived down in the one in North Miami Beach, and then I lived in the one that was a movie theater too for a little while. But that's how I got the opportunity with him, and I learned a ton of jiu-jitsu with Cyborg. He's the man.
Living in the gym, it seems like you've done that a bit. Obviously, when you're kind of starting off in the sport, you have to do it to cut costs. How did you find that? And especially now, I find myself, once I kind of move away from that college style lifestyle, it's harder and harder to go back. So how do you find when you look back on those times? They were tough, but they're probably some of the best times as well, I'd say, are they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had some of the best times of my life living in the gym. Like I lived in Cyborg's gym on and off for maybe from 2007 till 2000, the end of 2011. So, and then I lived in GFTeam. I lived in the Kashanga there in the gym there in Brazil for like a little under 3 years. And I could like if I think about it now, like I have the comfort of my house. Like I couldn't go back and do it now. Like I would just like if someone told me, hey, you got to go back and live in the gym for a year, I'd be like, oh, this is gonna be a nightmare, because I've been through it, But like you said, it was some of the best times of my life. Like me and Jaime Canuto were roommates for 3 years, and then we lived outside the gym for another 4 or 5 years together. And we go to tournaments every weekend, and you're just immersed in the jiu-jitsu all the time. And I ended up living with a lot of guys that are like Gutenberg Pereira. I lived with him for a long time in the gym. Max Jimenez, Jaime. There's just a couple guys that come to my head, right off the, just randomly. But I had a lot of good times living with those guys and learning jiu-jitsu and just kind of living that lifestyle.
Yeah, I find it's really nice as well to be, as you said, immersed in it all the time, because I feel the last year hasn't been the same. It's like you go training once a day and then you come home and you're not as immersed in it. Like you wouldn't be teaching as much classes, spending as much time with your friends from the gym, where you could just, an idea would pop into your head and you'd be like, lie down there on the floor and let me try out this move on you, kind of thing.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
From all the training you've been doing in America and Brazil, what would be some of the main differences you would see between the two of them? Because I've trained in both places as well, and they do seem quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just stylistically, like there's lots of stuff that I encounter in Brazil, like especially here in Canada too. Like in Canada, I actually have like a lot of good guys to train with here in Nova Scotia right now. We're starting to build the association GFTeam here, and I'm lucky I have a lot of good training partners. And I told the guys the other day, they're like, well, what's the difference between Brazil, and the States and Canada? And it's just stylistically the way the guys play, like half guard a lot of times. I play a lot of half guard. So I find in North America, guys approach more like a underhook crossface and try to smash you, or they'll go body lock in the half guard. And you don't really see that much in Brazil. You see the guys try to guys have really good knee cuts. Guys seem like they have a little bit more like a variety in their game sometimes. Long step is another thing that I don't see that much, when I'm training in North America. But like I think it's stylistically, like two of you like put it on a scale, like the wrestling in North America is a lot better. So a lot of the wrestling situations you get in, like for the dogfight in Brazil, if I'm in Brazil, if I go dogfight, I know it's fairly easier to take the guys down that don't have a huge wrestling base than if I get some guy that was a D2 or D3 wrestler or even a D1 wrestler. I know it's going to be like hell to get them down. I'm going to have to use a lot more like jiu-jitsu based stuff than just trying to wrestle them down.
And coming up as well, Brazil was always like, to me, the mecca of jiu-jitsu. Like I felt like I couldn't get my black belt without going to Brazil at least once. And the culture was very Brazilian when I was coming up. And it seems to be going away from that a little bit more. I don't know if that's just because I've been doing more no-gi recently, but how do you see it now? I don't hear as many people recommending people to go to Brazil as they did in the past. I was wondering, do you think there's a reason for that, or have you noticed that as well? Or maybe I'm missing the mark.
No, I think you're right on the mark, actually. Like, it's kind of crazy the way that jiu-jitsu is going now, because it's going in so many different avenues, like Nogi is blowing up, especially with all the stuff from Flow Grappling, with them doing the Who's Number One events. It's really kind of even out the playing field, because before, definitely if you look in the gi, the Brazilians are still ahead. There's no way that you can argue with the numbers of the podiums at the World Championships, But now you look at no gi, it's a much more level playing field. Like you see a lot of European guys, you see the Dan and Herdez squad, those guys are dominating. You see there's a lot of good Brazilian guys still, but it does seem like a much more even playing field. I think with the gi on, a lot of the events too, where they kind of migrated to the States and a lot of the bigger gyms are there, you're seeing a lot less people going down to Brazil where, you go to Rio is dicey. It's a little bit dangerous. It's much easier if you want to go to Legion or if you want to go to Atos or if you want to go to any of these big schools in San Diego. You can go to the gym and you don't have to be worried about some of the external things, just from your environment there, But like I was just in Brazil a couple of months ago, and I did a couple of tournaments down there, and the level of the tournaments is always crazy. But honestly, the scene there for Nogi is so small. I think that there is a big difference. I think like it's much different for the guys that are in Brazil, that are living in Brazil, compared to the Brazilians that are living in the States or abroad that are in that no-gi scene. I think it is behind because everything is so gi focused.
And you yourself, have you been focusing mostly on the gi, or have you been kind of doing more no-gi stuff? Because I know a few years ago you made a run at like the ADCC trials, and I was just wondering how you would kind of adapt going from gi to no-gi.
So for me, luckily, where I play a lot of half guard, it wasn't a super hard transition when I was focusing on no gi. And when I lived with Cyborg, we trained a lot of no gi. We trained with that Popovich crew there. I've known Wagner for a long time. He was a long time training partner. So when I did that, I kind of focused for like about a year. I won the Brazilian Nationals twice, no gi at black belt adult at middleweight, and actually I went for like a long period of time where I had never lost a no gi match, and people told me like, man, maybe you should do no gi. And I tried to I did the trials in Brazil, and I lost in the fifth fight, I think, in double overtime. The worst match you've ever seen in your life. It was just complete stalling for me and the guy. Right now I've just been focused on the gi because I've been doing this AGP tour, the Abu Dhabi stuff. So I'm currently ranked number one in the weight division and in overall for Master One. So I've really been focusing my time on that. But I have been training a little bit of no-gi here because there's some UFC guys, Gavin Tucker in particular, and I've been helping him once or twice a week. I do enjoy training in the gi more, but I do like training no-gi as well. And there's like a lot of people say like, oh, training no-gi is not going to help your gi. That's completely off the mark. If you train no-gi, it'll definitely help your gi game. It'll make your squeeze better. It'll make your wrestling better. Guillotines are an awesome attack that people don't really use that much in the gi that you can apply to gi grappling as well. I think one helps the other just the exact same amount. I don't think I don't think if you train gi, it's going to help your no gi more or vice versa. I think they're going to help, the same.
And for the half guard specifically, how have you changed that to the no-gi style? Have you been adding in some leg locks to it or focusing on more back takes?
So actually, it's funny because I trained yesterday no-gi. I hadn't trained in maybe like a month because I'd been in Brazil, and then Gavin, the guy that I trained no-gi with, he went away as well. I'm still trying to adapt to it now because before when I was doing the ADCC trials and I did those events, first heel hooks weren't really into the mainstream, and in the IBJJF you weren't able to do them. So I could play reverse half guard without any threat of the guy going to my legs, And like you were saying about worm guard, we were just like, oh, man, this is terrible. I feel the same way about the saddle because I've never really trained no-gi for the saddle. Like when we did the ADCC trials, I trained for 2 or 3 months for it. And Julia was like, oh, are you training heel hook defense? I was like, my plan is just not to get there. If I get there, I know I'm screwed, So that's something I've been trying to play with a little bit. I just kind of modify my attacks a little bit to defend my feet. And that's kind of the growing pains I'm going through right now. But the game has definitely changed no-gi with all the heel hook stuff. And, if you don't know it, like honestly, I don't really know it very well at all. I focus so much of my life into training in the gi. If you're not able to defend those or be comfortable in those scrambles, it's impossible to be successful in the no-gi,
It seems to be very frustrating for some people who are at such a high level and then they can get caught out by someone that they're way better than overall, but they just have that specific knowledge in that little position.
Yeah, Ryan Hall was a master of that when he was a purple belt. Like Ryan, I used to live with Ryan. I lived with Ryan for like over a year. I've trained with him a lot, and Ryan would always talk about when he was like a blue and a purple belt, he would tap guys that were way better than him because they had zero knowledge in the 50-50 or in the heel hook game. And he was an expert at that, and that was probably the only thing at that time that he really was an expert at.
And Ryan had a good deep half guard as well back in the day. It seems like deep half guard especially used to be much more popular than it is now, actually. I don't see many people talking about it or doing it. Why do you feel that is?
I think like everything, things kind of go in trends. And, I kind of prefer that it's kind of obscure now because I started to have more success at the adult black belt level later in my career. Like when I was already at masters, like I started having my best years when I was 30, 31, 32, because I think people only have so much time that they can dedicate into what they're okay, I want to get good at, defending the berimbolo. I want to get good at defending lasso. So like when deep half guard was really popular, like 2007 to 2011, maybe, or maybe even 2010, everybody knew how to defend it. So I'd have to have a whole bunch of tricks up my sleeve. Now, a lot of times I get people there and they don't really know what is going on, but it definitely has gone out of style. Like you can count the half guard players, the amount of them at black belt adult, like on one hand almost, you know?
Was there some early inspirations you had for the half guard, or how did you start to get into that?
So this is funny. I told somebody this story the other day. So I did a private lesson with a guy here that came to Nova Scotia, and I was young. I was like maybe 15 or 16, and I roll with him, and I felt like I did really good in the role, you know. And I asked him afterwards. I was like, "Hey, what do I got to get good at?" And I really was just kind of fishing for a compliment. I was like a 15 or 16-year-old kid, you know. I was just wanting him to tell me, "Hey, you know, you're really good," you know. And I remember he did pass my half guard a whole bunch of times, but this guy was kind of like an asshole to me. He was like, "Man, your half guard sucks. Like, you have no half guard game. Like, you need to learn how to do that because someone's just going to get there and smash you." And maybe like 3 or 4 months later, I ended up going to Brazil for the very first time. And another kind of crazy coincidence that happened in my life, like the school that I went to, the head instructor was this guy, Eduardo Gemelon. He's the guy that invented the deep half guard. He taught it to Jeff Glover, he taught it to Bill Cooper, and he taught it to me. And I didn't really go with the intention. I didn't even know that he was this half guard master, but he would just teach half guard every day. And I remember in the classes thinking like, man, I hope we learn like a guard pass or like maybe some close guard one day. But it was like 3 months of half guard. And I remember when I came back to Nova Scotia, my uncle Kevin, I was rolling with him and he was always a belt higher than me. He told me, he's like, man, what are you doing in the half guard? Your half guard is really good. I don't think I even swept him or was able to score points, but I was a lot harder to fight from that position. I had a lot of knowledge, you know? So he was the first kind of inspiration that I had, you know? And then I realized afterwards, I did some research on him, that I probably had the best half guard teacher in the world at that time, you know?
It's kind of a unique game as well. As you were saying, there's not that many people at a high level that are doing it, especially these days. Do you feel that helps you a lot with the competition? Because you've been competing as much as anyone, I'd say, in the world. You seem to be one of the most active competitors the last like 10 years or so. Has that helped you a lot, having a bit of a unique game?
Absolutely. I think I remember one of the guys that I really look up to in the gym, Vinny Marinho, was one of the best guys I ever trained with. He told me, I was talking to him on the mat one time and I was like, man, man, I'm having way more success now later in my career when I thought that I would be on the decline than, you know, I did when I was 25, you know. And he goes, things are just going in trends, man. He goes, people don't know how to deal with your game anymore. You know, he said, maybe 5 years ago it would have been harder for you, but I think, yeah, having like a strange game, I think is really good.
And how did it hold up against Adolfo in the gym? I'm just wondering. He doesn't seem like someone that would be very fun to play half guard against.
It was a terrible experience. I remember the first time I trained with him, I was used to training with Cyborg all the time. So I was used to training with big guys and I knew how to get underneath them and stuff like that. But Cyborg's game and Adolfo's game are so different. Like Cyborg is very like flowy and open. He likes to transition. He gives you space to work so he can try to counter you. I remember I trained with Adolfo and Adolfo just smashed me into the ground the first day. And I couldn't go back to training for like 2 or 3 days because I couldn't move my neck. I was all twisted up, you know, like, so training half guard with him is never fun. Now, one of the guys there that's really good that not a lot of people know about is Vinny Marino, the guy I was talking about. He was my size, and he's someone that would, man, he'd walk through my half guard in 45 seconds to a minute. Every single time I'd be winning tournaments, beating good guys. I'd be really feeling good in the room against everybody that was my size, and he would come and put me over his lap and spank my ass, you know. It would be terrible. But there's a lot of good guys there that are really good half guard passers, you know. One thing I went through with Jaime Canuto for sure, because Jaime didn't really know how to pass the half guard when we first started training. And then we trained together so much that like we've made so many variations on the game from top and bottom just from training with each other so much, you know. Like I can't go A, B, C with them. I got to try to go D, E, F. You got to go really far down into the loop.
Competing in Brazil, this is one of the main things that I wanted to ask you about as well, actually. Do you actually know how many competitions you've done through the years or how many matches you've had or anything?
I know that I've won probably about 100 tournaments in Brazil. So I don't know how many I've done because I lost a lot of tournaments too. Like there's probably 40 tournaments that I went out first round or went out the first or the second round, you know. I really don't have any idea how many matches I have. I know in the last couple of years I started keeping track. I think from 2013 to 2000 and till present now, I think I've had over 200 matches in that time period. But I've been going down to Brazil since 2006, and like I was competing a lot, like right at like purple belt, especially brown belt, and the start of my black belt career was probably when I was doing the most amount of tournaments. I remember one year at black belt, I did 27 or 28 tournaments in a year.
And was there anything you learned from doing that amount of competition? Because Brazil is a pretty intense environment to compete, I know. What was some of the main things you kind of learned and improved on from doing that many matches down in Brazil?
Just learn how to play the game. Like I think honestly, I think I won a lot of big matches in my career because I knew how to play the game. I knew how to get the guy into the spots that I was good at, and then score or run the clock or force a penalty, like little things like that. Like I remember when I used to go compete all the time, like now I'll go compete. I want to get maybe to the venue like an hour beforehand. And then when the matches are over, I want to leave, I don't want to stick around the rest of the day, But when I was a kid, when I was younger, and all the way up into my black belt career, until recently, I'd get there early and then I would stay the whole day at the tournament. And like I would watch like little things, like other things maybe that I experienced in my match or things I would see other people do. And like I remember different things being like, man, that was really sneaky what that guy did, I think just learn how to play the game, like kind of knowing the rules, especially with the gi on, like inside out, the IBJJF. Now that's the thing with AGP now too. The rule set is completely different. So I'm trying to compete more in the AGP now so I can get more experience in that rule set.
And did you have a kind of routine that you would be doing coming up to the competition that you would be working on, or would you just be more relaxed, show up and kind of freestyle it?
Before, I would always have like a set routine. The last couple of years, I just really I just try to keep myself relaxed as possible and try to have fun more now. Like I'll be 36 this year and I'm still competing at adult. I'm competing mostly at masters in the AGP now because they have really good prize money. So I'm trying to do that circuit to see if I can get the money at the end of the year. But I just try to have fun with it now. Like honestly, like in 2019, 2019, I got hurt in 2018 at the very end of the year. When I came back, I really stressed myself out, like I had a really good year in 2018 and I came back and I put all this like unnecessary pressure on myself. And I thought, man, I could just go open up a school or teach or train, why am I competing if it's not fun? So now I just try to have as much fun and not put any pressure on myself,
Where do you think that kind of pressure came from? Would you ever feel like, oh, I only have a few years left of competing with the adults?
I think that's exactly where it came from, and for me, like I had a couple of big wins that year. Like I won the Masters Worlds. I beat Keishio in the finals and I got second at the World Pro and I had some good wins at that tournament. And things kind of started to fall into place. And then I got hurt and I had to take some time off. I put all this pressure for me to get to be exactly back to where I was, and I didn't think about, hey, like, this might take a little bit of time or maybe I think that pressure really killed me a little bit that year. Like 2019 was my worst year ever competing. And I think it was just mostly mentally just like me like weighing myself down. And then in 2020, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to have as much fun as possible and not be stressed out about it. And I really kind of started falling in love with competing again because I wasn't loving it in 2019. It was the only period of my life where I was like, I wasn't enjoying it that much. Like I went to Tokyo to do the Asian Open and I won the Asian Open, which is a tournament that I always wanted to win. And I had zero fun until the tournament was over. I was just stressing myself out. I thought, man, this is such an awesome trip. And then when I won the tournament, we went on party and I was like, oh, this is a great trip. And then I thought about it and I was like, man, I was just completely stressed out for the last week when I could have had like an awesome time, So that's what I'm trying to do now. I'm just trying to have a little bit more fun.
And would you still get nervous at all when you would be competing now, or would you just be enjoying it, as you said?
I get nervous as hell, man.
Really, yeah?
I get nervous as hell still to this day. It was funny. A couple months ago, I was in Curitiba for the Brazilian Nationals, the AGP Brazilian Nationals, and I had a really tough first match. In the bracket, I looked at the bracket. I only knew there was one guy that maybe could beat me in the bracket, And I was like, shit, I'm probably going to get him in the finals. And where they don't seed the brackets at all, we got each other first round, And I was with one of the young guys from Brazil that I helped coach a bunch. He's one of the best brown belts at the gym. And he was staying with me. And we were warming up together. And we were drinking a beer after the tournament. And he said to me, he said, Coach, he said, I didn't really talk to you at all in the warm-up area. He said, because you looked like you were ready to kill someone. He said, you were super stressed out, I said, I was, like I try to keep myself calm now, but I still get nervous. If I said I didn't get nervous, I'd be lying,
Especially like back in the day, competing against all the Brazilians down in their home country, I'd say it was a stressful enough time. Probably the time I got the most nervous myself was as a blue belt in Ireland, just at like the Irish Open or some small competition. But the year before, I'd won everything in Ireland, so everyone kind of expected me maybe I just thought that they expected me. They probably didn't give a shit either way what I was going to do. But I was thinking, I need to win this now. Like, if I don't win this again, then it means I'm getting worse. I won't get my purple belt, all these silly things. And in the first round of the Irish Open then that I had won the year before, it was a Brazilian guy. And he had about 6 names written down on the registration. I was like, oh my God, he's going to be amazing. Like, he was just a blue belt. He'd probably been training 1 or 2 years. But in my head, he was like an exotic black belt with all these 6 names. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I think I won the match handy enough. And then I was like, oh, no need to be nervous at all.
It's funny how we work ourselves up sometimes. When you see a situation, then you put your hands on the guy and then you're like, oh, I can beat this guy.
And what kind of future goals do you have now with competition or with maybe having your own school?
So I moved back to Canada because that was me and my wife's plan always was to open up a school here. So that's what I'm going to do eventually. The thing is like a lot of Canada is still going into lockdown. So like I know Ontario is going into the third lockdown right now. Here, luckily, we haven't had a ton of it, but I'm going to wait till everybody's vaccinated, I think, to open up a gym just so I don't run the risk of getting shut down. So for me, it's kind of been nice a little bit just to have a little bit of time to compete still. I'm going to really just try to focus competing in the AGP right now because it's a really good cash prize at the end of the year. Like for the bigger tournaments, for Master 1, if you win, you get like $4,000 US. So it's pretty good money. I honestly really enjoy the rule set too, where have you seen the new rules for the AGP where everything is a point? So like an advantage is worth a point and they're only 5-minute matches. So like it takes a lot of the stalling out. So like if I swept you at the very start of the fight, but you get me in 3 arm locks and almost tap me, who did more in the match? You did. You've had more volume in the fight. You almost finished me 3 times. So you'd win the match 3-2. So I really like the new rule set. I've really been trying to get used to it. So I think before I always thought, I'll compete till I'm 35, and then I'll kind of call it quits. But man, I've been having so much fun competing. I do feel like I'm still improving. That I think this is what I'm going to kind of focus on right now for the next little while. Is just the AGP, their circuit, and see if I can win the money this year, and then maybe try to repeat next year too, and just kind of keep playing things by ear.
And are you looking forward to having your own school and kind of going into more of a coaching role?
Absolutely. Like that's one thing. Like I always coached at people's gyms. Like I worked in Singapore, I worked in the States, I worked in Brazil, and I do have people that I started coaching from very early on. But where I traveled so much, a lot of times like they'd have access to me for 6 months, or maybe they were a blue belt when I started teaching them. So I've never really been able to start people from white belt, So I think that's something that I'm really looking forward for me and my wife to do together. She's good brown belt and she's a good teacher too. So I think it'll be something cool, like a good project that we can have, like how we can set up the curriculum and how we're going to teach the basics and start people off from white belt, so on.
You're probably going to have more experience than anyone else who's going to be opening a gym. Are you doing it in Nova Scotia? That's where you're going to do it?
Yeah, I'm going to do it in Nova Scotia.
That's cool,
a lot of people told me, oh, you should move to Vancouver. You should move to Toronto. I had a lot of people tell me that because Nova Scotia is really small, but honestly, like I'm from here, so I'd like to teach people from here, for them to have access to me and to have a good program, a good school to be able to train at. And another thing too is like if I lived in Vancouver, it's like a 7 or 8 hour flight. It'd be the same thing for me flying from Brazil. So I want to be close to my family, So I'm really happy that we made the move here, and I'm just kind of waiting now to see when we're going to open the school up.
That's going to be brilliant to make sure to keep an eye out for that now. And thanks a million for coming on the show, Jake. Really appreciate getting to learn some of the stories about Brazil and Miami. Thanks a million.
Thank you for having me on, buddy. It was great having a conversation with you, and I haven't seen you in a little while, so it was awesome for us to chat a little bit.
Big thanks to Jake for coming on the show. It was really interesting to hear how he still gets nervous for competition, despite winning over 100 tournaments at the black belt level already, as well as how he's had some of his best results as he actually started to get older and come more into his 30s. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, share it with your friends, subscribe, and give us a positive review. It helps a lot. We'll be back next week with the first of another 2-part episode with everyone's favourite grappler, Craig Jones. Until then, slán agus beannacht.